Hello everyone, in this video I'm going to discuss to you about my first impressions and experiences of the private beta of The Division 2 that took place a few days ago. So The Division 2 takes place 7 months after the first game, and this time the game is set in Washington DC. You play as a Division agent whose main objective is to help rebuild the state of Washington and defend it from local thugs that kill people, loot corpses, and using their items for their own advantage. And you fight these criminals by killing them, looting their corpses, and using their items to your own advantage. Wait, what? For the most part, I had a bit of fun playing the beta, but I did have my own gripes about the game while playing it. Oh, and I should note that I never played the first game, so what I have to say about the beta is coming from someone who's new to the franchise. But first, I'll be talking about what I liked about the beta. The third-person cover shooting mechanics feel solid and satisfying, but there are times when my character just doesn't snap to where I want the character to be, leaving me exposed to enemy fire. Speaking of enemies, the enemy AI is smart and will try to flank or overwhelm you, which makes it a good challenge, but sometimes they suddenly spawn from all directions, which can lead to player frustration, especially in higher levels, but that's just my experience. Now, the environment looks so outstanding despite Washington DC looking like it's in a state of emergency. Washington DC in this game kind of reminds me of the setting of I Am Legend. Everything looks abandoned. The visuals look so colorful, and the devs should pat themselves in the back for making DC look like a pretty wasteland. The game is obviously fun with friends. Looting, shooting, and acting like a synchronized team is very fun with friends or some random guy you just met in the game. Progression is fun as well, and it actually makes me want to improve my character more by doing side missions, looting gear, and crafting gear. And since we are on the topic of gear, the game has a good variety of weapons. It can range from wimpy pistols to grenade launchers, and I love looting weapons so much that this game brings out the inner hoarder in me. Enemy types have good variety as well. Some enemies rush you, some enemies are tanky, others are made to annoy you, which I hate, and some spam endless amounts of explosives to you, which can get annoying, but at least this keeps you on your toes while playing. Oh, and enemies aren't as bullet spongy as they used to be according to some veteran players, so that's a good thing. The last thing that I like about the game is that there's almost no loading screens. The only time I see a loading screen is when logging in, respawning, fast traveling, or logging out of the game. It makes this sandbox game feel seamless, and the devs should really be commended for that. Now, let's talk about my dislikes in the game. In my experience when engaging targets out in the open streets of Washington DC, enemies can suddenly spawn behind you and you'll notice it until it's too late because you're too busy fighting enemies that are in front of you. It felt like a cheap way to challenge the player, and this happens a lot in my playthrough. Enemies tend to feel aimbotty at some point, but not as aimbotty as the enemies in Ghost Recon Wildlands in extreme difficulty. Ghost Recon players will know what I'm talking about. Now, safe zones, safe houses, and settlements feel a bit stale. Not as lively as I was expecting. I wanted to interact with a lot of people, but it turns out you can only talk to a few NPCs. The safe zones also feel artificial rather than a living space. There is too little interaction, but since it's a beta, I'll reserve judgment in the final product. How the fuck is that guy frying an egg without a stove? In addition, the world is open, but it's empty. Nothing really to discover, which made me not really explore the streets of Washington DC. Characters are very forgettable too. They don't really do anything to be memorable or to at least grab my attention. You know, the weapons in this game are more memorable than the NPCs, to be honest. Activities and missions are just going from point A to point B and mowing down waves of enemies, which makes the game feel like a shooting gallery after a few hours. It makes mission feel stale because of the game's repetition. I can say the same with the Dark Zone. It's just loot and shoot the same bad guys and places over and over. Going rogue isn't worth it either. The game says you get better rewards by going rogue, but I feel like it punishes players instead of rewarding them. They should really add more spice to the dark zone and the mission variety in the story mode. Moving on to technical issues, I played the beta on PC and I've had frame rate issues even when I meet more than the minimum PC requirements. So what I did is I limit the frames to 35 FPS so the game can run consistently and for the game to stop freezing. I also ran into some audio issues where my guns don't emit any sound when being fired, and some of my friends experienced having no sound in the game when using headphones, so these issues may seem minor, but this is something that should be fixed immediately. Oh, I almost forgot, this wouldn't be an Ubisoft game without server issues, of course. I experienced a lot of lag and connectivity issues just like, any other Ubisoft game. There are times I can't connect to the servers and I experience getting disconnected in the middle of a firefight and getting disconnected just when I found good loot. Now let's jump into the endgame. The endgame enemies named Black Tusks feel a bit too powerful. Even if you are outfitted with legendary weapons and gear, I had a very hard time completing the endgame part of the beta on solo, and it's slightly less harder in co-op. Enemies felt like they have an endless supply of grenades and suicide explosive drones being spammed to your position, and it felt very frustrating. The ammo drops for the specialization weapons are rare too, so the devs should really increase the drop rate for those. So after playing solo, I played the endgame part again, this time with friends, and my experience fighting these enemies was a lot better since they got my back. Enemies are more bullet spongy, however, but thank God some of them have weak spots. Some. And the damage they give you is a bit too much, I think. Really, the best way to fight these enemies is to know when to reposition yourself because they will keep sending explosives to you if you keep staying in one place, and you have to have a good sense of combat management. The final boss fight wasn't as cool as I thought it would be. The boss fight is just shooting the guy until he dies, no creative way how to fight him or anything. It felt boring and unsatisfying because the only challenge fighting him is that he was more bullet spongy than the other enemies, so I was not impressed with this boss battle. They should really add something to make it an interesting fight. The end game of the beta is meant to be played with friends, but if you're playing on solo, I think the game's difficulty should be toned down, in my humble opinion. Other things that I have to say about the beta is the PvP mode is meh, it's alright. Not bad, but not good either. Not a lot of people in Asia are playing it since that's not really the selling point of the game anyway. So far, you can't play the game offline, which is a bummer, and I can't pause the game yet since, the beta requires me to go online all the time, but I'm pretty sure that'll change in the final product. So yeah, that's all I have to say about the Division 2 beta. Overall, it was fun, but I got burnt out pretty easily with the lack of variety and interesting NPCs, but hopefully they will add more interesting stuff in the future. I did mention that enemies didn't feel bullet spongy, but in the higher levels you'll encounter more bullet sponges. Bullet spongy enemies. So yeah, bullet spongy enemies are still there. Now, will I buy this game? Nah, I'm not gonna buy the game because I'm gonna be buying Metro Exodus for the PS4. Anyway, thank you for watching. I hope you enjoyed the video. I hope you find this informative. But what about you? What did you think of the beta? This is Dre, and I'll see you when I see you. Take care.